Now time for this week's political spotlight. And joining me to shine a light is Sir John Curtice. He's a polling expert and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. So thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, John, for joining us. So this is a very exciting moment, actually, in polling. Sorry, my computer's... Oh, crikey. What's happened here? Sorry, my computer started. But this is a very exciting moment in politics. Now, you famously said 99% chance Labour of winning. Is that still
No,
up
hang
there?
on. Can I correct you straight away? Sorry. I said there was a 99% chance that Sir Keir Starmer would be the next Prime Minister. That is not the same thing as the Labour Party winning, which we might want to get to. Is it not the same thing?
Is that not the same thing?
No, it's not. No. Okay, so let me walk you through it, all right?
All right, go for it.
The point is that, I mean, usually what people mean by winning is the party winning an overall majority. Well, the truth is there's quite a range of possible results that we would end up having a hung parliament. But in a hung parliament, what you need to understand is that the Conservative Party would be short of friends. Basically, we know that neither the Liberal Democrats nor the SNP would be willing to vote for the King's Speech of a minority Conservative administration. They might perhaps just about get the support of the DUP. So unless the Conservatives are at around 315 to 320 seats, even if they've got more seats than Labour, Sir Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister.
So that is different, isn't it? Although I'm reading here, this is what it says in the Telegraph. Actually, Labour has 99% chance of winning elections, says Professor John Curtice.
Well, as you know, wonderful as the journalism profession is, sometimes as the Chinese whispers of Twitter go along, what you originally said sometimes gets somewhat translated.
So, look, we did some polling ourselves, and according to our People's Poll, Labour are 27 points ahead, with Labour on 47% and the Conservatives on 20%, Reform on 12% and Lib Dems on 9%, Greens are on 8%. Does that roughly reflect the polling?
Just tell me, Nana, is that done since Wednesday's announcement?
Yeah, I'll find out for you. I'll ask them there when this was done. But what is the polling saying now?
Okay,
then,
well,
Marcel
broadly
King?
speaking, at least I'm aware of 4 polls that have been conducted since Wednesday's announcement. So as of Wednesday's announcement, if you take the average of the 13 companies, including people polling, who had polled at some point during May, what you discovered was that on average, Labour were 21 points ahead of the Conservatives. It's quite a range. At the lower end, one poll put it as low as 16, but the other end, another one put it as high as 26. Now, since then, since Wednesday's announcements, I'm aware of 4 polls that have so far been published. And basically, they do not show any significant change. 1 or 2 have the Conservatives down a little bit, and another one has them up a bit, and others have Labour up a bit, and another one has them down. Crucially, and I think it's perhaps the thing that we're most looking for in the early polls, no immediate sign of Reform, who are the party that at the moment are taking more votes off the Conservatives than anybody else, no sign of their vote being squeezed. So basically, we have had now half a week's of campaigning, and it's not made any difference.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people were worried that, and I think the Conservatives are worried, and one of the reasons I suspect Rishi pulled the election early was so that Reform couldn't form and be so, powerful as they could be in 6 months' time, because I'm sure they're probably scrabbling around to find 630 candidates for each of the seats. So I think that's going to be a struggle.
That, of course, is one of the things that we'll discover down the track, although the last time I saw anything about this, Reform were claiming to have quite a lot of candidates in place. But I mean, more broadly, we are asking ourselves, well, to what extent are Reform not just simply able to fight an air war, i.e. with you in the media, but also on the ground, getting leaflets to people's doors, being able to run a canvassing operation, etc. And that we're very uncertain. But in the end, I wouldn't be that surprised if Reform's vote gets squeezed somewhat. But the thing here you have to remember is that Reform's predecessor, the Brexit Party, did not fight Conservative-held constituencies in 2019. So even Reform at 5% means in most of those constituencies, it is Reform plus 5, plus 6, plus 7, and most of it coming from the Conservatives. And of course, that does therefore mean that Reform are most likely to do damage to the Conservatives in seats that the Conservatives are trying to defend.
Wow, yeah, it's going to be a very, very, very interesting election. I have to say, I'm glued to it. I'm finding the whole thing fascinating. What about the apathy and voting apathy? Because a lot of people are saying they can't work out who to vote for, so they're not going to vote for anyone at all, or some people are going to spoil their ballots. Do you have any polling that shows how apathetic people are?
Well, it's not necessarily a question of apathy, although it's certainly true that these days you have to give voters a reason to vote. Fewer of us have very strong emotional attachments to Labour or Conservative, Liberal Democrat or whatever. People do have to be persuaded and cajoled to the polls. And there are a couple of things that we know from our experience of previous elections, particularly the general election of 2001, which is that if, first of all, people think there isn't much difference between the parties, and of course, the Labour Party in particular has moved quite strongly towards the centre, and arguably the Conservative Party has certainly not moved any further to the right than it was 5 years ago. So there's less distance between the parties now. But then secondly, if they also conclude that the election is all over by the shouting, and that's the potential impact of a 21-point lead in the opinion polls, if, of course, it's sustained through the 6 weeks, then both those things are known to make it less likely that people are going to go to the polls. And to that, I think we can add an additional factor, which is that neither Sir Keir Starmer nor Rishi Sunak are particularly popular. Neither of them are gentlemen, admirable as they are in a whole variety of ways. The word charismatic is not one that immediately associates with them. The same thing is true with Sir Ed Davey. It's true of John Sweeney, north of the border. And in truth, I think you have to go back a very long time to find a previous occasion when we had a general election when, in a sense, none of the parties had a leader who was really able to communicate widely with the public. That's undoubtedly one of the reasons why there's a lot of interest in how much Nigel Farage is going to campaign for reform, because Mr. Farage does have the ability to reach out to the electorate. Or, of course, on the other side of the spectrum, what impact will George Galloway, who will have to try to defend his seat in Rochdale, which he won in the by-election, how much impact he will have. And we do have two people who have charisma, but, of course, they're associated with relatively small parts of our political system.
And people are talking about the Muslim vote, although I know they're not one homogenous group of people who all think the same thing. But if we imagine it in that sense that their vote will have an effect, is that likely to have much impact on Labour?
Well, if the pattern of the local elections kicks through, and of course it may well be that some people who identify as Muslim who are upset about Labour's stance on Gaza, they might have been more willing to protest in the local elections than perhaps they will in a general election, but we'll have to wait and see. I think at the moment, we probably anticipate that indeed Labour's advance, such as it is across the country, will perhaps be weakest in constituencies with a large number of people who regard themselves as Muslims. But of course, most of the constituencies where that's the case, it's already a pretty safe Labour seat in most instances. So whether this will end up costing Labour even a single seat, but certainly probably not very much. So it could be difficult for Labour, it could be embarrassing for Labour, but whether or not it's going to stand in their way of getting the quite substantial majority that at the moment they seem to be heading for, that doesn't seem that likely.
Well, thank you very much, Sir John Curtice. He's a polling expert and professor of politics at the University of Strathclyde. Very interesting.